Good evening and welcome to the February 28, 2024 East Lansing Planning Commission meeting. Mr. Bartley, would you please take roll?
I will. Commissioner Boyd.
Here.
Commissioner Chapin.
Here.
Commissioner Denault.
Here.
Commissioner Hendricks.
Here.
Commissioner Lapine.
Here.
Commissioner Overby.
Here.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Vice Chair Wagner. And Chair Sullivan.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So, second?
Moved by Commissioner Overby, seconded by Commissioner Chapin. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. That brings us on to item 1.3, approval of the minutes from the January 24th, 2024 meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved. Support.
Moved by Commissioner Denault, seconded by Commissioner Williams. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. That brings us on to item number 2, committee reports. I don't believe we have any tonight. I think at some point in the future, Commissioner Wagner's going to give an update on the committee that he's a part of. So that brings us on to item number 3, staff reports. Mr. Bartley.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have some reports. First, as far as committees go, like you mentioned, Vice Chair Wagner has taken part in the Community Development Advisory Committee and will plan to give an update on that committee's activities on March 27th. Other committees that have been recently formed, Mass Timber Study Committee is, we're still getting availability for a meeting, but hoping to convene that group next week, as soon as next week, and then the master plan, or excuse me, comprehensive plan update coordinating committee is still in process. We're still waiting on a few names from various stakeholders, but we still intend to have that group begin meeting in March. So I will be giving you more updates at future meetings. Along those lines, as the commission knows, we do not have business on the agenda right now for March 13th. So the March 13th meeting of the Planning Commission is canceled. But we will meet again on March 27th, 2 weeks later. So that's in about a month. We'll get another month off, right? Wanted to call your attention to this little sheet that I've placed around the tables at everyone's station, and this is the parliamentary procedure cheat sheet. We had a parliamentary procedures training several weeks ago that was essentially intended for chairs and vice chairs, and we did have participation from this commission, so that was great. We hope to have additional trainings put on by the city clerk. I think response was great. Everyone found it to be pretty useful. So this is a helpful little guide for you as we move through commission, the meeting and motions. The only thing I'd really call out that is often, I guess, mistaken is that a friendly amendment, that came up in discussion when someone says, oh, I'd like to make a friendly amendment. That should be its own motion to be voted on by the whole group and not just, hey, Commissioner, how do you feel about this friendly amendment? Sure. So it's going to be that would be a separate motion to amend the underlying motion. We'll certainly talk more about different parliamentary procedure items as they come up, but I just wanted to call your attention to that. Some good news, a lot of good news. We have recently received notice from MSHDA, Michigan State Housing Development Authority, that we've received a grant of about $50,000 under the Housing Readiness Incentive Program, and that is to be used for our comprehensive plan update activities, specifically because one of the major focus areas is housing. And MSHDA gave us some great feedback and said, really good application, very timely, and would encourage us to look for more grants too. So we plan to bring that resolution to accept that grant to City Council very soon, either next week or the following meeting. We also, I'm very happy to announce that we've recently hired a new associate planner. Her name is Grace Whitney. She started on Monday and is doing great. She was previously an associate planner for the city of Dexter, and before that at Canton Township. Has her bachelor's from Wright State and master's in urban planning from Eastern Michigan University. So the associate planner job is not too much board and commission work, mostly permits, helping the folks at the counter, but you should expect to at least meet Grace at some point, and may have cases coming from her at some point as well. Finally, I wanted to make a little bit of a PSA about the Glen Cairn Overlay District. The City Council had set a public hearing at the beginning of this month, set a public hearing date for their public hearing for next Tuesday, the 5th. There was a noticing issue. Unfortunately, we cannot hold that hearing on that date. So on the 5th, we're going to be going back to the City Council to request rescheduling that hearing, likely to April 9th or April 16th. I apologize for the delay. It was unavoidable, but we're on track now. So we'll be again asking Council to reschedule that, likely to April 9th or April 16th. We did also put in the mail, I believe today. Is that right, Rebecca? Today, a mailer out to all the residents in Glen Cairn in the proposed overlay district as it was currently proposed, but also in an area that could be a proposed expansion area if the City Council determines that they want to approve the overlay and also expand the overlay boundaries. And that was a recommendation or a suggestion from the Planning Commission in your approval of the Glen Cairn overlay last time. So that's still moving forward. We've received a lot of questions from neighbors in Glen Cairn saying, what's the status? And I'm just saying right now, to anyone watching, we will still be coming back to the City Council for a public hearing, but that will be in April, again, either the 9th or the 16th. And we should find that out next week. Finally, our student group from MSU, the Urban Planning Practicum students, who are doing a student engagement involved in the comp plan update. They're on spring break right now, but they've been, they'll be returning next week and continuing to do their work. They've done some on-campus, in-person workshops with some great results, and also have distributed a survey, an online survey that has been going around campus, and they're already receiving many responses. I can't tell you exactly how many, but they've been very pleased with the responses so far and the volume of response. So I also know that they visited the Seniors Commission recently and might be doing some work with that commission to help them with their own survey instruments to find out about their constituents' concerns. So from staff, I'm smiling. I think that everything's good, and be happy to take any questions about anything I've said. Otherwise, we can move on. Commissioner.
I have a question on the parliamentary procedures training. I attended when I was on the Parks and Rec Commission. It was interesting. Actually, it was fun, and I retained maybe 10% of it.
Okay.
And I would welcome an opportunity as a commission member to attend this training. So anything that you can do to get those opportunities, and I would urge my peers on the Planning Commission to attend, because it's very helpful in moving forward. And as you say, understanding nuances like what is a friendly amendment.
Sure. That's good feedback. Thank you. And I'll talk to the clerk and try to get an idea of when their next training might be. But they're in radio silence still from the election, so we'll get back to them probably next week, and I'll let you know for sure when the next training opportunity is.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Seeing none. Yeah, I agree. The training was really beneficial. It was a lot of good information. Tough to retain all of it, although I'm trying hard, so you'll have to keep us honest up here. So that takes us on to item number 5, communication from citizens. Item 5.1, written communications. I saw just one general letter in the agenda packet, and then also some correspondence for, I believe it was item 6.3. So that brings us on to item number 5.2, verbal from the audience. So this is the time to come up and address the commission on any topic. But if it is regarding a public hearing, we ask that you come up at that time. And then additionally, please keep your comments to 5 minutes and identify yourself on the card that is up there or from city staff. So at this point, does anybody wish to come forward and address the commission? Okay, is there anyone online in the queue?
There's nobody waiting in the queue.
Okay, that takes us to item 6.1, public hearing to consider ordinance 1530, which would amend the zoning ordinance to make changes to items related to electricity. Mr. Bartley?
Thank you. So yes, this is indeed an ordinance. We've spoken about it at past commission meetings, but here we are considering some potential language. Essentially, this is this ordinance started about with questions about solar power and solar energy systems in the city, and specifically a sort of artificial threshold of 15 kilowatts for a system that would define the change between personal scale and utility scale. So we started by looking at that, and then as we were going through the ordinance and just basically noticing other items that had to do with electricity that could use a slight update and weren't especially substantive as far as things that might need to wait until after a comprehensive plan update. So essentially we're looking at requirements for solar energy systems, electronic display signs, outdoor lighting, and electrical vehicle chargers. I'd like to give a brief sort of description of each of those before we take any questions or comments. And I'd also like to invite up Kobe Sunday, who's an intern in our department. Kobe has done a lot of research and great work on understanding sort of the state of ordinances surrounding solar specifically. And Kobe's just going to give a brief sort of rundown about what's proposed in the ordinance as it currently is. I just want to mention one more thing before I turn it over to Kobe, that as you know, the next Planning Commission meeting will be on March 27th. Got there. Will be on March 27th, so about a month, and the process for a zoning ordinance text amendments like this is a public hearing here at the Planning Commission. Next time, more discussion and likely a vote to recommend action to City Council. Then it will go to City Council for their public hearing. They can choose to vote then or make changes. So we still have time, is my point. If there are changes that come up or suggestions that you find would be really useful to this ordinance. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kobe to talk about solar.
Hi everyone, my name's Kobe. I'm an intern with the Planning Building Development Department. So the solar ordinances were super forward-thinking for their time, but a couple of projects and a staff review of the code kind of flagged that area as something that needed updating. The primary change is removing the 15 kilowatt distinction between personal scale and utility scale. Language now in various cities across Michigan, pretty standard for it to be instead defined as an accessory use versus a primary use. In the packet, there's a list of a bunch of different cities that now have that distinction.
Can I stop real quick to clarify? So you're saying an accessory use, the solar personal size system would be accessory, but a utility scale system where the power is being used and that's the primary use of the property.
Yes.
That's how you're defining,
Yes.
differentiating between personal and
Yes.
utility scale. So, thanks.
A few other changes, generally making personal scale more accessible. Obviously, that language has changed as priorities for greener energy have increased. We've also explicitly allowed building mounted and building integrated language in there, updated some setback requirements. We've also lowered a few of the utility scale restrictions. And then just as a last thing, we noticed an error in the language. So under roof mounted, the height limit should be 18 inches and not 18 feet. So we'll correct that before the language comes back to you guys.
And so that was 18 inches above the roof height,
Yes.
right? Not 18 feet.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. And I just wanted to mention one thing too. In preparation for these changes, we started with a sort of professionals meeting in December where we brought together city staff, staff from MSU, East Lansing Public Schools, Board of Water and Light, several contractors, and sort of talked generally, then came up with the language changes and sent those back out for discussion. And we also had an open house at the library on February 12th, just after we introduced this language. So it was pretty well attended, and we were very happy with the suggestions and comments that we got out of that open house. Nothing really changed as far as solar. People were pretty supportive. But so it's been a good process. Anything about solar? Any questions for Kobe or myself before we move on to other topics?
Well, in prep for the next meeting, so I'm looking at my packet.
Uh-huh.
I'm on page 14. Got a nice little graph, sort of quasi spreadsheet. The column on the right proposed.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in essence what we'll be voting on?
Yeah, that's essentially a summary of the proposed changes. You'd be voting on the actual ordinance language, but this is meant to just
Okay.
give a real brief
Okay.
overview of what it
Good
means.
enough. Thank you.
Any others?
Any other questions from commissioners?
And one thing I'd also note is we talk about allowing utility scale solar. Currently, it's allowed only in agricultural, residential agricultural zone districts, of which there's relatively few parcels in the city. Just a few very large ones, but to the north. And is currently allowed only on parcels in that district that have an area of more than 5 acres. And we're proposing to also allow utility scale on parcels smaller, so about 3 acres, and also in the C, the community zone district, which we see for parks, schools, Department of Public Works, some city or utility facilities, et cetera. There's also been some discussion about whether sort of a solar roof could be installed on parking lots like you see in the larger parking lots at MSU along Service Road. And that language isn't really reflected right now in the ordinance, but we kind of wanted to talk about that at least and mention that that we certainly, our intent is to enable that kind of parking lot cover at some point too. Okay. I also wanted to talk about,
Landon?
yes.
Sorry, before we move on, I remembered I do have a question.
Yep.
Sorry, I'm trying to find my notes
great,
here.
it's great.
I see on page 3, one of the proposed changes is a requirement to send 12 months energy usage to establish a baseline. Is that for residential and commercial uses? And so, and then second question, is there a reason why, like sort of to what end would you want to gather that data?
Can you answer that faster than I can?
Yeah, so the requirement wouldn't be distinct between different zones. It's for any personal scale project within the building permit.
Yep.
The reasoning for that is to help ensure the personal or the accessory use versus the primary use. You know, if you have a project that's 100%, 110%, something like that's personal scale, but if it's 300%, it's not going to be, so.
Perfect. And is there a sort of like enforcement mechanism if you get, or if you find out that it's maybe going above and beyond the personal use?
I mean, I don't think that, not really,
Okay.
honestly. If you're establishing a solar energy system on your property that's meant to be accessory to the primary use, it's going to be that. Now, if it's cranking way up enough to be problematic, I mean, the utilities have a sort of limited sort of how much higher you can step up, which is why we talked about Kobe was mentioning the 100 and 110% sort of energy baseline. We just sort of want to establish that and understand also what kind of power usage we're seeing.
Okay,
So,
great, thank you.
yeah. Anything else on solar?
Yeah, I did have a couple
Yeah.
questions. So, can you just talk to me a little bit about the history of this language, like where it started, how we got there? Was it based off of a comparable municipality? I think you said there was pretty good public feedback that led into the language we have now. I just was curious the context.
I know you did some research on that. And we also have Cliff Walls in the audience, who I know has, from Department of Public Works, who I know has the inside scoop on the background of that too, but please go ahead.
Yeah, so from what I can tell, our language was adopted around 2013 with the 15 kilowatt threshold. 15 to 20 was kind of the recommendations and pretty similar throughout Michigan, but it's changed particularly in the last 5 years to that accessory versus primary use. That's all the specifics I have.
And I think that you said that the state had sort of a recommended threshold or upper end maximum that they recommended of 20 kilowatts.
Yeah.
And it sounds like from discussions at the time, it was just sort of this seems like a good place to start, is setting it at 15 kilowatts. What was the other thing about?
98% of any personal home use solar that's gone into the city has been 8 to 9 kilowatts. So that was another reason. It gave a very high ceiling and captured 99%.
Okay, so if you didn't hear that through the mics, Cliff was saying that 98%, roughly a very high majority of the power that we're seeing used from solar is more in the 8 or 9 kilowatt range. Recently, we've seen issues where, because of changes in funding availability, funding sources for larger solar projects and for non-residential solar uses, we're seeing more interest from non-residential uses for solar, and in general, those non-residential uses are larger and need more than 15 kilowatts. So we saw, for example, recently, the All Saints Lutheran Church right across the street needed a 80 kilowatt system to make it work for their needs, and they actually had to get a variance for that. Did that answer your question, I think?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's helpful context. So you took what was recommended by the state and built upon that, and that's the model that you started with. You had public feedback on it. Was there any opposition to the thresholds that were suggested? It's just a bit tough for me seeing the numbers, on the page. I just don't really have any context for what those mean, right? So I'm just trying to get a better understanding because it's, after all, an ordinance suggestion. So.
Yeah, if you have like specific questions about specific numbers, most of the language was pulled from either Ann Arbor or Lansing, which are two cities that were told to us often that were like good examples in Michigan, as well as suggestions from, I don't remember it off the top of my head, but it's something like Michigan zoning for solar energy systems. I think it's in the packet. And we also met with a few staff members from Michigan State and University of Michigan who worked on that, alongside the staff meeting and the public meeting. But yeah, to your point, there was no large opposition to anything that we proposed.
Just to clarify, are you asking about the current round or back in 2013?
I'm asking about the language that's in front of us. Yeah.
Okay, the language in front of us, yeah.
Just the historical background and where it started and how we got to this point, really. Any additional questions from commissioners on the solar component?
And I'll leave it up to you, Mr. Chair, if you want to take public comment on solar before we move on to EV, or if you'd like us to just sort of explain each point and then move to public comment. If there is.
My preference would be to have as much background on all this before, and then we can have public comment.
Then the other change I'd mention is for electric vehicle charging stations. There's been a question about when exactly are charging stations required. The language as we currently have it says a level 2 charging station is required in parking lots with 50 or more required parking spaces. And at least my interpretation of that has been when those spaces are what are required by our sort of parking number calculations in the ordinance. But in discussions with council members and others, we've determined that the original intent of that language was more likely to just say when you have a 50 space parking lot or more, you should have a level 2 charging station. So we removed the word required from that 50 or more required parking spaces clause and just have it when you have 50 or more parking spaces. I should also mention that as it is right now, there is when you have 50, basically you need to add another charging station in increments of 50 parking spaces. So if you have a 50 space parking lot, you need one. If you have a 100 space parking lot, you need two, et cetera. But nothing's proposed to change to that language right now, except that there has been discussion, including coming out of the public open house, about changing those thresholds. Do we want to perhaps require an EV-ready parking space at a lower threshold than 50 spaces, and then require a charger itself at 50 spaces? Do we want to require additional chargers at less than 50 space increments or more? So it's certainly worth considering if we might want to change those. And this has come up fairly recently with a couple of projects. So we've seen just recently 2111 Merritt, which you've seen came to you within the last couple months. They've actually offered to install a charger in their lot, which is going to be just over 50 spaces at the end of the day. So they would meet this requirement. We've also talked about whether DC fast charging stations, so a higher sort of power, capacity and faster charging would be appropriate versus level 2, which are slightly lower as far as power and speed of charging. But DC fast charging is also significantly more expensive. So we've been a little bit hesitant to include that in the ordinance so far, but that's certainly up for discussion. That's essentially it as far as EV charging. Any questions about what our proposal is there? Okay.
Questions from commissioners? I noted 2 issues when I was looking at the language. I think the first is, I'm not sure exactly what a level 2 charging station is. Is that a defined term? Is that referenced elsewhere? What does that mean exactly?
Yes. I should look and see if it's defined in our code or referred to, but there are national standards that talk about how do you sort of define level 1, level 2, or higher. We should certainly add a reference to that.
Okay, and the second was one of the additions on the last line here where it says all chargers required by this provision shall be maintained in operational condition at all times. That seems very vague to me. Things break, things get replaced. I guess, how did we land on that language, and is there a way we could improve that?
My understanding is that we just want to make sure that if we're requiring chargers, we want to make sure they're working. There sort of are known issues of specifically with certain companies more than others, but chargers just not being operational when you pull up to them, which is a difficulty for EV drivers, especially when they're expecting the charger to be working. So I think it certainly maybe doesn't account for regular wear and tear and maintenance needs, and charger's going to come down now and then. I think that what this language does is gives us an opportunity to enforce if there's been a charger that's been off for some time, it might be worth setting a threshold of if you got to get to this one in a week or something, or a few days. I mean, we could set that kind of a minimum threshold for enforcement or grace period before you get into hot water. I was looking for a pun about electricity, but it wasn't there. Sorry.
You could have thought of one, I'm sure. Maybe for the next hearing. I guess I'm just thinking of hypotheticals here of vandalism or somebody breaking a charging station, and then they're in violation of the ordinance. And especially if it's in a densely populated area and it's a repeat issue and they're repeatedly in violation, and there's likely a way we can clarify that. I'd like to think about that one a little bit longer.
That's good feedback.
I don't know if we have any additional questions for this. No. All right.
Okay.
Ready for the next overview?
The next is about electronic display signs. Our sign ordinance currently essentially defines sign brightness as nits, which is a technical term that I don't feel confident explaining, but essentially my understanding is that it's sort of the amount of energy and light that's coming out of an individual like LED or light cell, light producing point, it's you can measure it at the point of the sign, like at a point of light. I'm really having trouble with this explanation. Nits are much more difficult to measure than foot candles, and also much more difficult to measure in relation to ambient light. And what we found from complaints about signs that are too bright is in relation to the ambient light conditions. So when you have a dark area with a 10-foot candle sign, whereas the surrounding light is at 1-foot candle, then we can make a determination, whereas the ambient light we can't necessarily compare to nits coming from the sign. So we wanted to align those measurement units to measure using foot candle, which you can also measure using a pretty basic light meter versus specialized equipment that the city can't afford. So we're looking at changing the units of measurement for measurement, not for the initial installation of the sign. The manufacturer specs are going to be listed in nits, but when we need to measure for ambient light conditions and whether or not a sign is the right brightness compared to everywhere else, we'll use foot candles. I apologize for that explanation, if you can call it that. But what we also found is that we really don't have language right now that defines maximum light levels on properties and also at night. So what we did is we added a maximum of 500 nits for the sign. It currently requires a maximum of 500 nits at night, which is half an hour before sunset to half an hour after sunrise. We're changing that definition, or the maximum brightness, to 0.3 foot candles greater than ambient light conditions. So when it's dark out, the sign is darker. If it's bright, say downtown, and there's lots of light around, then the sign can be brighter. There's not currently a requirement for any sort of sensor to automatically change those signs, but the signs all can have sensors like that. So we're requiring that a sensor would be able to sense the ambient light conditions and change the brightness of the sign accordingly. We've also received a couple of suggestions from our electrical inspection staff and building inspectors that haven't really been incorporated yet. So we expect to still see some relatively minor changes to what's proposed for the sign ordinance. But really, we're just looking to have a better way to measure our sign brightness and a way to compare the sign brightness to the ambient light conditions. I hesitate to ask for questions on that because I don't know if I can answer them well. And next time, if you have technical questions, I'll make sure to have a subject matter expert here. But
I have a couple. This is a logistical one. Is why are we using nits as the daytime measurement, and then foot candles, which, by the way, I've never heard that term before. It's an interesting term, like horsepower. You know. I guess why are we changing the measurement? Because the ordinance you're striking nits, 500 nits for the evening, and replacing it with 0.3 foot candles, which is a sentence I never thought I'd hear myself say. But yeah, what's the rationale there?
For what it's worth, my understanding is that a foot candle is the amount of light that you would receive from a candle held at a foot away from your face.
Okay.
So the reason why we're keeping nits, I guess, for the maximum level is because you can define a sign when they buy it and install it, they can set it at 2,000 nits. So we have that sort of threshold that we can easily set, but we can't measure it. And so that's why we're changing the measurement units to foot candles, because then we can go up with light meter after the sign is already installed. It will be set, factory specs will be set to 2,000 nits maximum. And then when it drops in level at night, we change to foot candles so we can measure the light. Because foot candles is you can measure compared to ambient light conditions with foot candles and you can't with nets.
But is the average commercial property going to have the equipment to measure how many foot candles of light there is? I guess
Their sensor would.
Okay,
the sensor on the sign would.
But doesn't that
for
measure
any new
nits
sign.
anyway? So you're requiring them to measure the sign in nits during the day, and then why not do it either or provision, not to exceed 500 nits or 0.3 foot candles, I guess?
The reason we wanted to get rid of the absolute maximum at night is because, again, when you have a bright surroundings, 500 nits won't appear that bright, but when you have very dark surroundings, 500 nits will appear very bright. So we wanted to sort of tie bar to the ambient light conditions. The sensor will sense in-foot candles or nits. It can sense all kinds of things, but it's going to be measuring ambient light conditions and then translating that to lower the sign light, the level of lighting for the sign, 2.3 foot candles. No more than 0.3 foot candles difference.
Okay.
I'm still
Yeah.
not happy with my explanation on that.
It's a valid attempt, yeah.
Okay. I'd love to get more information, more technical information, and maybe send that out sooner than later.
Questions on this proposed sign ordinance language? No, seeing none.
I think it's nice that we have an opportunity to review, preview, and get ready for the next meeting. So you gotta love a public hearing where we can kind of get some of these things out and do our homework prior to
Yeah,
when we
well
need to
said.
take action. Yep.
I know that I have some homework to do, mostly
Well,
how
I
to
think
talk
we all
about it.
do.
Okay, then if I can move on from signs to outdoor lighting, it was kind of similar to the sign question of, do we have minimum or maximum light levels? We don't right now, so we set a maximum light level, and this is all in foot candles, because foot candles are very easy. When we receive photometric plans, lighting plans, those are almost always in foot candles, because we're talking about the levels of light on the site, not coming out of the actual light, right, which would be nits. So we're setting a maximum level of 10 foot candles on the site, and then a maximum light level at the lot line, where the lot line is adjacent to residential uses or zone district, of 0.5 foot candles. So you're keeping the light on the site, and you're doing that by making all of your fixtures fully shielded, directed downwards, full cutoff. So right now the language says, yes, you must have a cutoff angle of 90 degrees, but that essentially means that your light is pointing down, not necessarily that it's shielded, so the light can still be bleeding off the site and causing potential nuisances. So we, and our intent is also to, I should say there's a likely change too that we'll make to the wording to address bright lights that are in a window, inside the window, but you can see the bulb, the exposed bulb. We've had some complaints about those, and we don't currently have any way to enforce. So whether or not that would go into an outdoor lighting ordinance or a sign ordinance, because it kind of acts like a sign when that happens, we're intending to add some language about that too. We would only allow unshielded decorative light fixtures in specific circumstances. There are those now and then, and we wanted to make sure we had some flexibility to allow that, but otherwise having fully shielded, no portion of the lamp, lens, reflector, et cetera, can be visible beyond the shield unless you're right down under the light. And that's just, again, a way to limit the amount of light spilling off of the property into a different place. We're adding exceptions for fuel station canopies because those tend to have higher light levels in general, and also car dealership lots, although we don't have any of those in the city right now. But the sort of state of the art for those kind of uses is 20-foot candles. So we proposed sticking with that as well, except that we also wanted to make sure that you're not having a super amount of, I guess, variation across the site. So we're adding a maximum ratio of the lowest light on the property to the highest of 15:1. And that's, again, just to introduce some sort of a basic control on how much variance you're going to have on light levels from the site. I felt a little bit better about that explanation, but not much. Can I answer any questions about lighting, what we're proposing?
The state regulates electronic billboards, right? So that's not in the ordinance.
We are not touching billboards right now. That's the intent. We do have requirements in the zoning ordinance or the sign ordinance about billboards, but my intent was to keep it focused on electricity.
Thank you.
Any
Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Knoll?
I'll ask maybe a sort of odd question. When I was living in Chicago, a big topic of conversation around the time I was there was exterior lighting restrictions that would be beneficial to migratory birds. And I know the U.S. Green Building Council has some suggestions to that end. Are those topics of conversation that staff have considered at all?
So in our research about this, that kind of came up as far as dark sky protection.
Yeah.
And so the intent of the fully shielded, full cutoff lights is to minimize that amount of light going into the sky.
And is that why you're also going to reconsider window lighting as well?
Yeah, well, and the window lighting is that's more based on being a nuisance.
Okay.
And causing glare to people walking or
Okay.
driving.
Perfect.
But yeah, as far as the sort of dark sky migratory birds, and just bringing nuisances down for people, for the clouds, for the birds, that's the intent of the full cutoff
Thanks.
provisions.
Good point. Any questions? Comments?
Okay.
Seeing none?
And this is a public hearing. We don't expect any kind of vote tonight. Like I mentioned, we'll plan to bring this back with suggestions and feedbacks and changes to the language in about a month, our 27th meeting.
Okay. So at this point, we can open the public hearing on this one. Let me see if we have any cards on this. We do not. So is there any members of the public that wish to come forward on this agenda item? You scared them away with your talk of foot candles.
It worked.
Yeah. All right. Anyone online in the queue?
Complicated things by throwing horsepower in there on top of foot candles, man.
Yeah, I know.
There's
Anyone?
nobody waiting in the queue.
Okay, so at this point, we will close the public hearing and see this at the next meeting. That brings us on to item 6.2, a public hearing for the property at 120 West Saginaw Street to remove approximately 27 existing trees. Mr. Bartley, I think this is you.
Yeah, so this is an interesting case and one we haven't really explored before. We have a tree protection manual in the city, and again, I keep pointing to Cliff Walls in the audience from DPW. He's our environmental specialist, and he can talk about the tree protection manual and also this case in particular if needed. But essentially, this is 120 West Saginaw Street. This is the northwest corner of Saginaw and Abbott, just north of where we are now. The former Michigan State Medical Society building, and the property itself is about 3.3 acres. The original structure, about 14,000 square feet, was completed in 1961, and it's shown up here on the screen. You may be familiar with this building. And so recently it was purchased. Yes, there was a addition in 1979 and an atrium connecting the two in 1991. It is a historic, designated historic place, both in the National Register and by the state. So no changes are proposed to the building. The applicant purchased the property in May of last year, and in July we received a phone call saying by a resident complaining that trees were being removed. Cliff went out to the site, and there may have been some miscommunication about who had called who when and what had they said. But the contractor, a landscaping contractor, said that a staff member had told them several months before that a tree removal permit wouldn't be necessary. But Cliff checked through and said, no, it is necessary, and we need you to stop work. So he found the remnants of some trees had been removed, and then shortly thereafter, the landscaping contractor applied for the tree removal permit to allow the removal of 27 trees over 4 inches in diameter. But that permit was not approved because there are specific requirements in the ordinance that allow for removal of trees, one of which is that the Planning Commission would approve the site plan without those trees, or like showing the removal of the trees. So we have several pictures in your packet showing specific trees proposed to be removed. There's also a sort of overview slide. I can just, is it down here? That's intended to show the site, and with the trees circled that either have been or are intended to be removed. I'd like to ask Cliff, if you would, to come up and just sort of give your understanding of, I guess, of the tree protection tree removal permit and what have you.
Yeah, so the tree, it's called the land clearing and tree removal permit. Ultimately, like the role that I have and DPW has is not to say, if a tree belongs in a certain place or not. It's a emergency bypass in case there's something like an ice storm or an emergency declaration, infestation, something where an applicant doesn't want to wait for 2 months to go talk to you guys and have a tree standing that could otherwise be a hazard. And so those are the exemptions that we as DPW can provide if it's like clearly dead and verified by us, infested, verified by us.
the disaster declaration. But ultimately, it's the decision on if a tree should stay or not, or all that. It's not DPW's role or intention. We're just there to, the nature of the permit is not just for tree removals, it's for land clearing. You know, I do the soil erosion components of our regulatory requirements as well, and it just helps us keep track of what's going on in the city. But yeah, so when this happened, yeah, Landon mentioned there was some confusion. We just got some resident complaints, went out there. There was even more confusion because we were trying to get a hold of the planning department. They were in a meeting and all that. So it took us a while to figure out the applicability for the zoning, to make sure that, you know, something didn't go to another DPW permit staffer or the planning department, but ultimately had to submit a stop work order just because it didn't have the planning administrator's approval. So those are the metrics that allow me to approve a permit, those exemptions on the health of the tree, and if Landon says it's okay. And he won't say it's okay unless it goes through this body. So that's the intention behind that permit. It's not a judgment call based on, you know, if trees are good or not, you know, that kind of thing. It's basically a check to make sure that you've had a chance to look at it.
Although if a tree were dying or diseased, you could approve it being taken down. Right?
If it was, it's a pretty high bar for that, you know, so we're not here to argue if it's declining or, you know, if it's an older tree. If something's clearly dead, or there's, you know, during an emerald ash borer outbreak 10 years ago, we want that down quick so it doesn't spread. So it's an emergency off-ramp to not have to wait for a meeting like this, not for any judgments beyond that.
So, and we do have the applicant here, but if there are any questions from your Cliff, I'd love to take them.
So first off, I'm not sure who put the agenda packet together for this, but I think it's really helpful with all of the pictures of the individual trees. I don't know if that was the applicant or you, but that was helpful for me. So is part of that staff review, would trees growing into the building, I know that could potentially cause problems with squirrels getting in the roof and other animals. And then the one that stood out to me too was the one near the sidewalk that was obviously growing over the sidewalk into the power lines. I don't know if that one would require them to go through this process, or if it's just kind of the entirety of the project and that's why they're doing it. Commissioner Denal, did you have a?
Yeah, I was going to say, in the really wonderful staff report that y'all prepared, by the way, there are 11 situations in which, right, a tree can not have to go through this process. And one of them is protecting utility lines, which that tree is like leaning on them, and then to maintain public streets and sidewalks, so.
Okay, yeah, you talk about the list on page 4?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, and that,
Sorry, I didn't mean to answer the question
She
that
answered
you
the
asked.
question for you maybe, so.
to that point, like, there was, I think, a long, not even really a memo from me in there. Those were my day of notes.
Yeah.
I actually looked at it today to see when, like, the last time I touched those were the 13th of July at 11 a.m. So that was just like, you know, I knew this was probably going to come to something like this, so I wanted to be able to remember. So these are just my day of notes. There was a couple trees that I was like, you know, I was very hesitant to shut down a large operation with not the best information, you know, getting random calls. And, you know, that crabapple that's leaning over the sidewalk, at the time that we left it, we said, continue working on, you know, these select trees while we figure this out. We'll be back in an hour, kind of thing. You know, I don't want to shut down a crane with incomplete information. But then once it kind of emerged, you know, where we were at with this, and that was such a, you know, once we actually had the application in hand and there was 27 trees in addition to what was already proposed, we just kind of said, this is not an immediate hazard. This is part of a larger change, you know, so we will just let this go to the planning commission. It's taken a lot longer than I anticipated. At that time, it was, you know, if that was a one-off crabapple tree at a doctor's office and they had the same issue, yeah, we would probably exempt that. But with such a wholesale overhaul of, you know, what I understood as a National Historic location, I was being a little conservative on that.
Noted, thank you. Any additional questions?
Well, are we,
Commissioner Chapin, go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
Commissioner
Well,
Chapin.
are we going to, questions, comments, are we prepping for a vote here? Because I think we can vote on this tonight versus not. I would advocate for a vote, but before we do that, maybe we should spend a little time discussing, so
Sure.
I sort of defer to you.
So procedurally, you could make a motion to do that. I'd like to hear from the applicant and hear their overview
Yeah,
and then ask
good.
them any questions that we have.
Good.
And then at which point I think it would be appropriate
Okay.
to make a motion
Good.
if that's your desire.
Yep.
I did just have a procedural question for you, Landon. Are we, so what's next for this? This is going to go to council like a typical application, right?
No,
No,
this is fully a planning commission
This is
decision.
the finality of it? Okay, and then this isn't an up or down thing, right? Like, we have the latitude to review this if necessary, like any of the specifics, if we should choose to get into the minutia. Not suggesting we do, but I just want to understand what we're getting into before we have that
Yeah,
discussion.
so you can choose to vote tonight or not. You should take public comment, and then you can approve or deny any part of the site plan,
Okay,
in whole, in none, or parts of it.
okay, thank you. My purpose for that was just to clarify what's before us, so thank you for that.
Sure.
Commissioner Denault, and then Commissioner Lepine.
Just to clarify what is sort of what is allowed by the property owner and what is not. Trimming of trees, fine, right? Don't need a permit, but like wholesale cutting requires a permit for larger than 4 inches in diameter is the sort of.
Yes, the site plan process, the planning process is the root of that because, let's say there's an applicant who comes to you and you say, we'll approve this contingent on this screening with these arborvitaes or these maple trees here, and then they get the approval, 2 years later they come knock them down. That's the purpose of this land clearing permit, is just to make sure that anything that would impact the landscape plan, site plan, is done with the consideration of this body.
Yeah, and I ask because Chair Sullivan mentioned, for instance, like a tree that's maybe growing too close to a building. One option might be to trim the tree rather than to cut it down entirely, right? So there's options. And that would be a path that would be open to the property owner rather than cutting it down. Like, they wouldn't need a permit to trim a tree, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
There are some, in the city, I don't want to gum it up with some of the tree stuff, but, over 30%, if you prune a tree more than 30%, that's considered removal because that's
kill the tree.
too much.
Yeah.
And it would kill the tree, most likely. So there's some weird stuff like that. Like, you could, not saying that this applicant or any would do that, but there's a fine line.
Yeah.
You could say, yeah, we'll trim it, and candlestick it, and leave it, in a very poor state. But there's some nuance like that. But yes, you're correct.
And then my second question, looking at the agenda packet that we were given, there are, in the trees that have been other landscaping shrubs and such that have been marked for removal, right? This ordinance that protects trees is only for like trees larger than 4 inches in diameter. So all the arborvitae, all of the shrubs that they have slated for removal, right? They can go ahead and do that without our approval.
That would be a question for Landon. It's not under DPW's purview.
Okay.
But, yes, so the land clearing.
That's correct.
and,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect.
Good question.
Commissioner Lepine?
Just a quick procedural question, Landon, based on something you just said. If we were to vote on this today, are we voting on like yes or no or partial of the tree removal? Or are we also voting on the new like proposed landscaping that's included in this? Is
You're
it two?
voting on tree removal.
Okay.
Yeah.
So nothing that has to do with like the end where it's showing what's proposed.
I mean, there's some sort of routine landscaping that's
Okay.
proposed, but the tree removal is the issue, and that's what the planning commission needs
Okay,
to
cool. Thank you.
consider.
But to clarify, we can ask the applicant what their plan is as we're considering the proposal to remove the trees.
Yes.
Well, just to
Commissioner Overby?
clarify that, but the tree removal leads to the new landscaping that they have proposed.
Mhm.
We don't have the purview to approve this new landscaping.
If their
But it will
landscaping
lead-
meets the requirements of the ordinance.
Yeah.
But the request is simply focused on the tree removal, is
Right,
whether or not.
Right.
It's a site plan.
But with the trees gone, they will proceed with their landscaping changes that they want to make.
Presumably, yeah.
And to add that, you're welcome to ask the applicant that too, when they come up here
But
shortly.
We wouldn't
Commissioner
know,
Lapine?
we wouldn't know yet, right? If I know it's not a site plan per se, but we wouldn't even know if this meets the zoning code yet, do we?
For landscaping, no. Because we haven't requested a landscaping plan, we've just requested a plan showing what trees would be removed.
So,
So
Landon, are you suggesting a landscaping plan? Is that going to come before us, or this is the end of the discussion potentially?
will likely be the end of the discussion.
Okay.
Okay.
Unless the landscaping that they're proposing wouldn't meet the
Didn't meet.
requirements of the ordinance without.
I got it.
I think that's helpful, so we
Yeah.
can understand exactly what decision that we're making
Yeah.
potentially. Any further questions for staff? Seeing none, I believe we're ready for the applicant. I have a card up here from, I believe, Mark Klaus.
Good evening. My name is Mark Klaus. I'm here on behalf of Eyde Development tonight, and Larry Viles, who is our senior property manager, is with me as well, mainly because, like Cliff, he has more of the firsthand knowledge than I did. I was not on site during, back in July. I was in the office trying to reach Mr. Dempsey and Scott Hauser and other people who were at the city trying to communicate with them from the office on the 12th and the 13th, but not on site. To give you a little bit of background, I think Landon has done a good job of that, but our company purchased the building in May of 2023. We refer to it, and as you know now, it is a Yamasaki building, and it is an important building. That is the reason our company purchased the property, quite honestly. I brought with me this evening, one of the owners of our company had in his library the book by Mr. Yamasaki called A Life in Architecture. Our company has a history of working on historically important properties. You may know the Knapp's building downtown Lansing is a property owned by us, and we have owned it since 1986, put it into a complete historic restoration starting in 2012 and completed it in 2015, and our offices are located there. We also did a historic restoration of a building in downtown Toledo. It's a former Owens Corning headquarters known as the Fiberglass Tower. We did a historic rehabilitation, restoration of that building starting in 2015 and completed in 2018. Both of those projects were headed by historic architect Liz Nibby. Liz is a member of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network, was our architect on both of those properties, and Liz, at our invitation, visited this property before we bought it and since we purchased it, and has been our consultant on the property. We take these properties very seriously, and we greatly appreciate the architecture, both from a community standpoint, but also as a company standpoint, and respect the work that was done. There have been people from the city of East Lansing, that have toured the building with us and are very familiar with that concern for the property. The nature of the application that is before you appears to be clear to your staff, but maybe not so clear to the applicant, quite honestly. The landscape company did their work that, in fact, they've worked for us, I should back up a little bit, have done work for us for 4 or 5 years. We have been pleased with their work. They have done work for us throughout the community and continue to do that work. There was, as was pointed out, some miscommunication. It was not from our office, it was from the landscape company that had made a call to the city and questioned about removing trees. And I was not party to that, and I don't want to point fingers at anyone, and that's certainly not our position today. It's just to know that it was not, obviously, if it was on a piece of property that was hidden from someone, we could argue, and someone could argue you're trying to do it and not be caught. This is a piece of property that is a prominent location within our community, and no one was trying to do something and get away with it and do it under the dark skies or something. It was something that it was obviously thought to be correct. And I believe the landscape company understood, and there was some confusion even as to whether they could start or stop during that time period. But I think based on Cliff's notes, I think there was, it was recognized that everyone was trying to be cooperative during that time period. One of the items that we are confused by is the fact that we did submit what we refer to as a landscape plan earlier. In fact, it was in 2023, and asked for it to be reviewed for completeness. And then Larry Viles followed up with Landon on that and saying, is everything okay with that? And a few months later was indicated that it was complete, and he was fine with it. So quite honestly, coming tonight before we received the packet, the thought was, well, we're coming in to talk about our new landscape plan in conjunction with the trees that are to be removed. Apparently that's not the case, which is fine. We'll work our way through that with you. The other misunderstanding is that the application that was submitted was for 27 trees, but it's not 27 trees plus those that were already removed. It's 27 trees in total. During the day on, I think it was on July 12th, if I recall properly, there were 16 trees removed, and the application now is for 11 additional ones. We can work with you and with staff to clarify which ones are which. We thought that was clear, and it wasn't 27 more that we're requesting. I've discussed this internally with our company and with our staff members, and I think given the level of, and it's certainly sitting back, it's not nearly as complex as all the electrical things you guys talked about earlier, but there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of trees, there's a lot of information I think that needs to be discussed, and I would encourage you, in fact I would request of you not to take action tonight. I would ask that you table it and allow us to work cooperatively. We've attempted to do that since we purchased the property, and we will continue to do that. We respect the property. We respect the effort that the city has in protecting that property and in encouraging the proper maintenance of the property. We want to work with you and to make it a joint collaborative decision on what happens in the future with that site. It's been difficult to do, quite honestly, from our standpoint. There has been, as you know better than I do, there's been staff changes. The conversations that we had back in July were with people who, particularly with Mr. Dempsey, I had numerous conversations with him. His effort at the time, and I don't know that word effort is appropriate, but he was looking for and trying to find within the city records the approved landscape plan for that site so that we could determine if the trees that are being requested to be removed were part of trees that were approved and required by the city at the time, or whether they were simply trees that were added over a period of time on the property. There was not such a plan. As you know, the building was built in 1961. The additional building was brought in 1979. So most of those trees are quite old. Whether they were part of an initial plan, we don't know, and according to Mr. Dempsey, there was not a plan located. So there was a significant number of weeks and months that occurred while that was happening, and the conversations with emails going back and forth trying to make sure of where that stood. We then brought in the new landscape plan in an effort to show that we didn't want to just cut out all the trees and then walk away from the property. Our intent is to continue to beautify the property and to improve its appearance. Right now, the architecture of the property is utmost in our mind, quite honestly, and being able to see the property is important. The property has been left, I don't want to say neglected because I don't think that's fair from the prior owner standpoint, but it certainly has not been maintained from a landscape standpoint as we would like to have seen it done. The property stood for sale for over 3 years before we bought it, and as you know, or perhaps you do, the Michigan State Medical Society still resides in the building. They do lease a small portion of it. They did occupy the entire building for a period of time. They now occupy, I think it's about 5,000 square feet of the entire, they're actually in the secondary, the building that was added. What I would ask, because I think it's difficult in this situation for us to go tree by tree on a plan that I have in front of me that you may not, and isn't exactly, some of the pictures that were provided are ones that we did provide, and there were ones not actually from our company but from the landscape company showing some of the concerns and questions they had, not necessarily the trees that are asked to be removed. So what I would ask of you tonight is to allow us to continue to work with your staff, with your staff. If members of the Planning Commission as a committee or as appointed individuals would like to join us and perhaps do a tour on site, walk it, look at it, talk about it, and come up with a plan that is acceptable to you, acceptable to your staff, and to the experts, that's our goal. We want to continue to own the building. We look to having it for a long time in our portfolio. It is not intended to strip the building or to do something that would reduce its value. The idea is to improve it and to continue to have it be an important part of our community. So again, I ask that you allow us to determine the best way to work with staff, to work with you, and we'll bring in our landscape company and come up with a solution that works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for the overview. I have a clarifying question.
Certainly.
Shifting it over to Mr. Bartley here in a second, but so really this, as I understand it, as we discussed before you came up, this proposal is really just us giving you the green light to cut down the trees. It's not, we're not reviewing a landscape plan. I don't think we would be required to review the landscape plan. I think that would potentially. That
was not clear to us.
So you want us to review a landscape plan?
Well, the plan was, the drawings were submitted back in September, October, and we didn't ask that they be approved or not approved. We simply gave them as informational because we were still reviewing them, quite honestly, but we wanted, again, it had always been our intention to improve the landscaping at the property. The first step was to remove the trees that concerned us both from, and again, I appreciate what Cliff said, that a tree that was marginal or had issues, unless it was dead or nearly dead, is really the only way that it would meet the qualification for him to give it an exemption, and I understand that. We looked at them as trees that were not healthy, and perhaps not healthy and dead are two different things. So our intention was to clear it up, clean it up, and then re-landscape it. So again, if the intention of staff is that they want to look at the plan to make sure it meets the ordinance and therefore it would need to be approved by the Planning Commission, that's fine with us. We want to do the appropriate things with the city and have the end result be something that you're proud of and that we're proud of.
Okay, thanks for the background. So this one is this type of application is a bit new to us, so I'll just ask this broadly. Mr. Bartley, is there anything you'd like to weigh in on in regards to that process?
No, I think this is a good conversation. I'm glad we're having it, albeit publicly, but Yeah, there are certainly enough unknowns with this process that I'm certainly happy to postpone if that's of interest to the commission. We certainly want to make sure. Well, if I was looking at a landscaping plan from a, sort of a vacuum without previous development on it, and that may have been what we were looking at with the landscaping plan that was submitted. But if that landscaping plan includes the removal of all these mature trees, that part could not be approved by staff. That would be what would be approved by the planning commission. So I guess you certainly could look at the landscaping plan that was submitted. It's not the removal of the trees. That's what we needed the site plan for, that showed the axes of these are the trees that are being removed. So that's why I guess I'm kind of looking at this as more of a narrow focus on just the removal of the trees versus the whole landscape plan.
If I may,
Please.
I think now knowing more than we did up until the last day or so, is that we can focus on the trees that are gone are gone. And if there is a requirement that we do something to mitigate for the replacement of those, we can do that through the new landscape plan. But what we can focus on are the 11 trees now that we would like to take away from the property, and mirror that, or actually combine that with the new plan so that we know what's going in their place, or how that would be mitigated on the site itself. And now that we're having the conversation and I have read the staff report and understand some of the concerns, I think that we can work that out. And I think that it would certainly, quite honestly, I think you've got enough on your plate. This would simplify what needs to come to you, and I think staff can then provide you a clear line of steps that need to be taken.
So to be clear, you're no longer asking us to postpone this?
I beg your pardon?
You're no longer asking us?
No, I am
postpone
asking you to
sorry.
postpone so that
Okay,
we
you
have
are
the time
asking
to
us
do
postpone.
that.
Okay, understood, thank you.
But I don't think we have that information yet.
Yeah. Commissioner Overby?
Yeah, before we move on, so I have a couple of questions. I understand the historic nature of the structure in the building. Is there anything in the landscaping that has any historic nature that we should take into account in our decisions?
Not that we are aware of.
Right, and that's what I think you've told us.
Yes. If in fact there was, and we've gone back to the plans, the property, the building itself has been placed on the historic register.
Right.
So that it would allow, if we wanted to do certain work and receive historic tax credits and so on, we could do that. That's not currently our intent. It may be someday in the future if that were to be necessary. But nothing within that materials have any of the plants or the trees on the property designated as such.
And my second question has to do with what I see as the basic nature of this request. It is to remove trees. We're not looking at the landscaping plan. We don't have the prerogative, and I welcome anybody telling me I'm wrong on this, to approve that. We're being asked to approve the removal of trees. Now, I know that will lead to a landscaping revision in this property, but we're not being asked to approve that. So I'm struggling on what additional time for review would give us. I don't get that at all.
Well, I think first off, I don't know that it's been clarified to you because I haven't seen it from staff, the 11 trees that we're asking to remove. It's not 27, it's 11, so I think it gives an opportunity for you to be informed as to what those trees are, where they are located, and the situation with each of those trees. But I also think that as part of that, we would be willing to commit to the landscaping improvements to the property so that you knew what was being done to mitigate the ones that are being removed. I think that, in my mind at least, if I were sitting in your seat, it would make me more comfortable to know that certain things are being done to replace those that are being removed.
Well, and this is perhaps a comment to my fellow commission members. I feel like we're making this much more complex than it needs to be. And I think it's a very simple request, and that we could vote on tonight, and then tell you, go forth and do good with your landscaping installation that you will do in place of these, of the existing landscaping that you will remove. I welcome other comments.
Yeah, we can potentially get to some comments. I know Commissioner Chapin had mentioned that as an option, but I think the applicant's requesting more time to fully flesh out their proposal, and, you know, I think we can consider that or not consider it, but that's what they're requesting. Before Commissioner Lapine has a question.
Yeah, I think this conversation has been really helpful for me, and I think I would personally not be comfortable taking a vote on this tonight. What would help me be comfortable, I think, at the next meeting, because I'm by no means a tree expert, is if maybe someone from the city or Cliff, if this is your expertise, I'm understanding, it would be helpful to have some, you know, clear photos of the trees that we're talking about, the 11 that we're talking about, but also some level of indication of, I don't know the right word, but if those trees are all healthy, if they're somewhat ill, it would help me to have an understanding of what we're talking about, because cutting down 11 perfectly healthy trees is something different to me than cutting down.
If I may, the staff report on page 42, they do have an overview of each individual tree. They list exactly the reason why they're requesting to have it taken down. For example, exhibit number 1, disease verified by EL arborist, and then they list out a plan for what they want to replace the tree with. So it's not a landscaping plan necessarily, but I don't know if staff put this together or the applicant did.
That was
but-
actually sorry.
I was actually going, and this is sort of building off that, so before we get to your answer too. There's a point of clarification too, that in multiple times or maybe there's conflicting information in the agenda packet, because twice it says that trees, the targeted trees were verified not to be diseased by both a city arborist and a third-party arborist. But then later on in the packet, it does say that some of the targeted trees.
So Layden, I know I've been pretty limited involvement in the planning side of things, but that mention was from the applicant.
That's what I was wondering, like who is saying that?
Yeah, so that was a misunderstanding based on our conversations in the in-person inspection. But what I would offer this group, one of the challenges with this, and probably some of the confusion around the numbers and all that, was because this application came an hour after we met them on site. It came from not the applicant, but from their contractor. I think some clarity, an actual application from the applicant with, you know, the specific trees called out in the required format would be helpful to you.
Yeah.
And it would just be a matter of, you know, right now the application is, or I guess it is under Larry, but the permittee, it was the Lawn Stars, you know, the contractor. But they were doing things retroactively, also encompassing the trees that were already gone.
So just to clarify though, like the city arborist and the third-party arborist did not find evidence of disease or damage or insect infestations as it says earlier on in the packet in the staff report.
So that arborist is third party, but it's also who traditionally and at the time we were using, so it was third party and East Lansing is the same.
Same person.
We have since hired an internal on-staff arborist, which I'm very excited about. But again, you know, the level of review here is not even really considering the long-term outlook. Is this going to be a problem in in this review period or not? But ultimately, they, you know, in full transparency, what our arborist had mentioned is they had some familiarity with the previous owners of the property, and I believe it was Smith Tree that used to take care of it, and said that there was likely or they could notice that the treatments that used to occur, you know, for 40 years they did some treatments for some, types of bugs I can't pronounce. And things like that, that weren't an immediate health risk to the tree, but they could tell that treatments had stopped. So it wasn't in premier form, But ultimately, we weren't there to assess that. We were there to assess if we needed an emergency bypass, which we did not rise to that level.
Thank you. So I believe there's a desire for more information from the applicant.
If I
Willing to
may
provide-
add-
Just one
I'm
more.
sorry.
Commissioner Lapine, did you have any?
No, I'm good.
follow- Okay,
I
you're
do
good.
have a question for the applicant.
Commissioner Denal, go ahead.
So looking at our packet here, it says Planning Commission may approve tree removal if it finds that either or both of the following are true. Proposed tree removal or land clearance will not substantially affect privacy with adjacent properties, screening, buffering between adjacent uses, and there are apartments that border this property. Wildlife habitat or movement, soil and slope stability, or regulated wetlands, or proposed tree removal or land clearance is necessary for the economic use of the property. And so I guess my question to y'all is, where do you see the removal of the trees falling into one or both of those categories?
Well, I think those are, if I understand those are categories in which staff or Cliff could have approved them?
No, there's
Oh,
11,
okay.
there's 11 exceptions to the tree removal requirement, in which they could have just
Okay.
been cut
None of-
down. So my question is, which of the two criteria are you asking that or hoping that these trees can be
Well,
removed?
first off, none of the trees are being removed adjacent to the apartments.
Okay.
Okay, so from a screening standpoint, it does not apply. The other issue that we have that doesn't seem to be within the criteria is the risk of damage to the property. And as you've looked at those buildings or those properties, the pictures, you see that many of the trees overhang not only the sidewalk that you've all noticed, that a tree that we were told we couldn't remove, but also, pardon?
You could remove it. I think Cliff
No,
gave you the permission
that
to
was- we were
cut the
told-
tree down that was
we were
hanging
told
over
to
the
stop
sidewalk.
all.
There was those two that at the time, like I mentioned, we were
Yeah.
very hesitant with all this flying around, and
Yeah.
he said, she said, not, any fault of the applicant, but just confusion with, like he had mentioned, this also happened at a time of turnover and trying to find who may have gotten this permit. But like I had mentioned, there was hesitancy for us on site. It was Lori Bates and I to completely shut down a site, not understanding our authority to do so. So trying to work with them to continue some level of productivity while we tried to track down Tim
Yeah.
Dempsey. But then once we figured out or were able to visit the ordinance and check the zoning map and also confirm that there was no approved permits in either office, that's when we went back and said, we have to stop all of this. That was a misunderstanding on my part to allow some of that, trying to play it cautious and
Yeah.
give them the benefit of the doubt, which, again, they were respectful of that. It was just a challenging situation because of the unknowns.
And if I may try to address the question and I
Yeah.
didn't have an opportunity to finish, and I want to make sure I pulled it up from your packet as well. It says that the proposed tree removal or land clearance would not substantially affect or reduce. First one is privacy between adjacent properties, and I don't believe that it does. The second one is screening, buffering between adjacent uses and activities. And the trees that are proposed to be removed are not acting as screening or buffering between the adjacent users. So I think that is met. There's been nothing to suggest that the removal of the 11 remaining trees would affect wildlife or the wildlife movement. Nothing has been presented to you or by staff that would suggest so. I think that Cliff's been on site, and I don't know that there is any soil or slope stability that is involved with these trees, and there are certainly no wetlands in those areas. So I believe it meets all of those criteria. And the other one is not something that we're suggesting that it is doesn't foreclose of the economic viability of the property. It certainly, again, I think it's important for any property to be able to be seen. Covering it, especially a property that has the historic presence and the value that this does, it's important for a property like this to be seen. And that is really our goal. It's not and it has been, so that it can be seen, it can be appreciated by all those who drive by, attract people that want to be and see the property, and our ideas are to improve the property. If you go by it now, the shrubbery that are out front are probably ones that were put in 1961, and if anyone has been in their home since that time period, it's more often than not, those shrubs have to be removed and replaced. So that's our goal.
And
So I-
shrubs are not part of this, so you can go ahead and remove
Yes,
those,
I
from what I
appreciate it.
understand.
I appreciate that.
Commissioner Chapin has a question.
Yeah, so don't be scared of me because I'm going to make a motion. I think I'm going to pause on that. So at least until I have a
We
chance
still have
to
to do the public hearing.
talk,
anyway.
all right, that's fair enough, good. So first of all, I anticipated this, but you said everything I was hoping to hear tonight, okay? It's really about the property, it's iconic, it's important to East Lansing, it's important to your business, and I look at this not necessarily tree by tree, but I look at that corner as so important to our community, that building with so much history, and really, I think we're just trying to clean up that property, for lack of a better word. You said beautify, which was a better word than clean up. I did drive by today to make sure I understood, but the tree that's hanging over the sidewalk that shows up in the picture that's a problem. So I think it does require some cleanup, some beautifying. It's a beautiful property, and I think you said everything, you and Mr. Viles, everything that I was hoping to hear as a commissioner. So kind of to Chuck's point here a little bit, it seems to me that we could vote on, we're talking about 11 trees right now.
Yes, sir.
I think we're talking, I love your comments about wanting to work with the city of East Lansing because this is a city of East Lansing iconic landmark property, and including the city in the decision-making seems very, very reasonable. And I've heard you say that several times tonight. So would it be helpful if, after the end of the public hearing, Chair Sullivan, we were to use the language in here to move forward with the 11 trees? We're already at 16. It does say 27, but allowing you to take out the trees and then work with the city on the landscaping and the next steps with our department here. Seems to me that might be a viable solution for tonight, but if the commission's not interested in a vote tonight, that's fine too. I defer. But I'm pretty darn comfortable with what's going to happen here. I'm happy it's in your hands, and I think that we want to be a good partner with you to preserve, beautify, clean up, improve that corner and that iconic property. I did drive by today. Not only did I look at the landscaping, but I actually even looked at the historical marker, which we have in here, and the key word there is headquarters. And it's about the medical society. It's about what happened on that site and the history leading up. And I think we preserve that historical landmark, which is really important by making some of the landscaping improvements that you're talking about. I'm
Thank you,
very
Mike.
comfortable with however the commission wants to proceed, but I think we do need to say, let's move forward and allow the owner to help beautify that corner. And Cliff, your notes were terrific, man. I mean, you wrote a lot in one day. I could never write that much in one day. Your notes about
I knew I'd be asked to remember all this months later, so.
those were great.
Gave
The
it the
staff
effort.
report, as others have said, was spot on. So I'm really comfortable with moving on and allowing your group to move forward in the capacity that's comfortable for you and the commission.
Thank you. To clarify, we still got to do the public hearing too before we take any potential
If I
action.
could indulge you with one
Sure.
other quick comment.
Commissioner Overby.
When I looked at the request, I looked at it as a gestalt with, here is what you want to replace the trees with in your new landscaping. And when I considered it as a whole, recognizing our role is to approve the tree removal, but you need the tree removal to get to your landscaping plan. And assuming that the landscaping plan here is an accurate presentation of what you plan to do, I was impressed with the landscaping plan.
And we,
And it's quite,
We are-
it's a beautiful plan. It has a variety of trees and shrubs to replace what you're taking out. So it was apparent to me that you had taken that into account in making your landscaping plan.
and I'm comfortable tonight committing to the commission as well as the staff that that's the plan that we will follow. That has been approved by our office, by the owners of the company, and that was part of when it was first submitted to Landon. We said, don't do anything with it quite yet, because Larry wanted to share it with you immediately to know that we were working on it. And we did take quite a bit of time to go through it, to take full advantage of the property that is there, to recognize that some of those older shrubs have actually done damage to some of the concrete because the roots get up underneath them, and we have work to do, but we have to get rid of the old stuff first. Thank you for recognizing that. I appreciate it.
Just wanted to give you.
Should I step away so someone else can actually speak?
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to that. I guess I'm still a little unclear with those comments, if you're asking us to still wait to take action
You know
on
what,
this, or-
after hearing the comments, I mean, I don't want to keep you from doing
Okay.
what you're charged with doing. As I read through the staff report, I think it was confusing to us. I think we have managed to clarify the steps that are needed. I think meeting the criteria, as has been invited for me to explain, I appreciate that. If, in all honesty, if you can approve it, I'd be happy. We can move forward with the landscaping and get going. I mean, spring may be here sooner than we think, although maybe not today. I thought yesterday it was. So we can do that. My concern was if you were compelled not to, I'd rather have more time to work with staff, in all honesty.
Understood. Thank you
Okay.
for clarifying. Any additional questions? I believe
I
Commissioner
did have one.
Denault has one.
You mentioned that you were working with Mr. Dempsey to find some landscaping plans from when the building was originally built.
Correct.
And that no one was able to locate those. Have y'all looked at any of the Yamasaki and Associates collection at the Archives of Michigan to see if there is an original landscaping plan that's part of that?
We have not.
Okay.
We've gone through in fact, unfortunately, the building's not in his book. We were hoping that it was there. The Medical Society does have a number of pictures. We were able to retrieve all of the plans that they've had. Larry and his staff have gone through them, and there are no landscape plans. So it was how the planning happened of that, and how, I don't know in 1961, quite honestly, what the city required before that, the plans were done. But we certainly have photographs of the property over the years. Again, I think most of these things were done early on, but they were added as time went on. And then when they built the secondary building in 1979, is that right? Then the addition, the piece that brought the two buildings together was built later on than that. And so I think things happened over that period of time. And so we've not found them, and I don't believe Mr. Dempsey ever did. Landon, did you ever find anything different?
No.
Okay.
I know the Archives of Michigan do hold
We will.
and they
Yes.
have models, I think, of many of the buildings that Yamasaki built.
Yes,
So
many here in
there
Michigan,
might be,
yes.
there might be some more
We
information.
will certainly search for that. Thank you for the idea.
Good
Appreciate it.
recommendation. Seeing no further questions, thank you.
I can come back if you need me. and we'll
Okay,
go for it.
good to know. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, before you open for other comments, can I just
Please.
mention one thing? There was just a comment, I think, that Mr. Klaus made about the 16 trees being gone and sort of being, well, this is a done deal. And to an extent, I agree. From another perspective, I would say those trees may have provided screening from the street. And also, if the Planning Commission is not comfortable, would not have been comfortable with the removal of those trees, for example, but maybe others, you do have the opportunity, if you're inclined to approve the request, that you can impose reasonable conditions to meet the standards of this section about would this substantially affect or reduce screening, privacy, et cetera, wildlife habitat. And that could include requiring the addition of, or the planting of new trees or shrubs somewhere. So keep that in mind, I think, that certainly those 16 trees are gone, and that's passed. There are things that I think the Planning Commission could do to try to mitigate the impact of the loss of those trees, but that'll be up to you. But I wanted to make that clear.
So point of clarification on that. So just reading the agenda tonight, it looks like we're approving the full 27. So are we retroactively approving the removal of those trees, or are we just approving the potential removal of these 11 trees?
I mean, I would say that you're essentially approving the removal of all 27. Because they were removed without the tree removal permit, and there would be fines associated with that we would ask you to look for all the trees and consider, I guess, whether you would have approved a plan without those 16 trees, and if not, but you're inclined to approve the removal of the 11, perhaps you would say, yes, we would approve this with these conditions, and whatever those conditions might be.
Okay,
And
good to know.
Point
Commissioner
of,
Nault?
point of clarification, Landon.
Yeah.
You mentioned that if we, theoretically did not approve the proposal here, that they would be fined for those 16 trees. So they have not yet been fined for the removal of the 16 trees.
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure it was a little.
We were hesitant to
Yeah.
assess those fines.
It was a little unclear in the packet, so I just didn't know.
Sure.
Okay.
There's other penalties. It doesn't necessarily, so it's pretty aggressive. It's $200 an inch, and that's diameter. For what was lost, we're talking about $38,000 here. Replacement in lieu is also an option. Typically, when something like this comes up, there is an illegal one-off. We had one of these recently where there was a city street tree that a contractor accidentally removed, and we fined them, for that. This one, when this was all going down, again, talking about my hesitancy, I was also hesitant to write a $38,000 bill without a blessing of above. And at the time, Mr. Dempsey had suggested waiting for any kind of considerations of that till this body. But also, we do recognize that there's a lot of confusion at the city. That was the ordinance was the only way, other than talking to staff, to identify when a permit is needed. That was something, I've only been here about 2 years, but I recognized early on that needs to be addressed. 8 months before this process, we applied for a grant from DNR to create a tree manual that spells that out, has FAQs, and basically is looking to address that issue moving forward. And so, as staff, I understood there was a lot of confusion, and at the time there wasn't a lot of tools to negate that. We have put those tools in place now, but unfortunately this all happened while this was still about 3 months away from being published.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just further consideration. And
Yeah, and we certainly don't want
Context.
to have any sort of, punitive action or fines or something leading the conversation. And frankly, that's not material to the request as far as, should these trees, would the removal of these trees affect these review standards? And so I'd like to sort of say, hey, don't think about that too much. It's sure there are substantial fines. We're not interested in moving forward based on fines. We're interested in moving forward based on our review standards.
Mr. Klaus? would you
I
like
do
to-
have I don't have a methodology to share this with everyone, and I don't know if you have an overhead, the old-fashioned overheads? No. But what this, and I can pass it, you can look at it, we kind of color-coded these, and we were getting ready to work on this, and it shows the location of the 11 trees that we are requesting to remove, and it does show the location of the 16 that were removed. And that may give you some, if you were on the property recently, you would know, you would then realize that there used to be trees here, and if that would be of any help, I'd be glad just to share that with you. Can I approach? Sure. Start at the end.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's fine, start down there. Commissioner Williams has been waiting patiently.
I've been looking at this one sentence in the staff report from the time I read it initially and all evening, and it's the one that Landon just read. And it comes after the language that Commissioner Denault read earlier about the two conditions. And the sentence reads, if the Planning Commission is inclined to approve this request, it may impose reasonable conditions to ensure the standards in subsection A above are met, including the planting of new trees or shrubs. Okay, so we're talking about 16 trees that are already gone. I don't know where they were. I don't know whether or not they assisted in meeting some of the conditions in subsection A. We're not looking at approval of a site plan, a landscape plan that may or may not address the missing trees. We're just talking about the 11 remaining. I don't know how we could impose reasonable conditions at this point. I'm no arborist. I don't know how to do that. So I'm not sure how to move forward at this point. I'm sort of stumped. I feel like what comes
There's a good
first?
pun. She's stumped.
I'm stumped.
I just
Yes.
wanted to
Oh, yes,
Too
that's
soon
I love
for
it.
those trees that were cut down. Too soon.
First the
Yeah.
nits and now the stumped, boy.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
I'm
Yeah,
confused.
I think any potential condition such as that would have to be replacement of the trees as outlined in the staff report, because I think it's on slide 42, they do give an overview of what the replacement plan would be. But again, to your point, I'm not an arborist or a landscape architect. I don't understand what a lot of those plants are. It's like the previous discussion with some of the terms for the lighting for the sign. I'd never heard those before, so.
I don't know how to do what we are able to do because I don't feel able to do it.
Yeah, so I will say too, we're kind of getting close to deliberating this, and we haven't given the public the opportunity to weigh in yet, which is a requirement. So is there any additional questions for staff or the applicant before we open this up to the public hearing? Okay, at this point, we will open the public hearing. I do have one card, Josh Ramirez Roberts.
Thank you. I've been patiently waiting to go to the bathroom. I'm afraid that each moment I'll leave will be the one that the public hearing actually commences. So, listening to this conversation has been incredibly frustrating, not just in the bathroom sense of it, but when we're thinking about it, we do not have to be an arborist to come to the understanding, to come to the conclusion that cutting down 27 native trees and 11 additional native trees will negatively impact wildlife. That is inherent in the very act itself. All right, we've all read the Lorax. We know what happens. It is 70 degrees in February, guys. Do we want to consider chopping down more trees? And although the landscaping plan should not come into this because it is not part of the requirements mentioned under the ordinance, when we are thinking about landscape mitigation and the trees that are being added, they are minor landscaping shrubs that are non-native. They are heavily pruned, heavily trimmed. Keep in mind, these will not be adult trees as outlined in the landscaping plan. Now, when we're thinking about cutting down these trees and possible remitigation measures, right? These are not things that will take weeks to replace, months to replace. These are adult trees that have been there for decades. These will take decades to replace. And now, the comments that have been brought up, the economic viability, I don't know about you, but the comment of visibility. I have never once driven by that building, and the thousands of times I've driven by that building in my entire life, have I gone, I can't see it. Believe it or not, with that structure, a pure white, unique Yamasaki, I've never gone, is it there? It just hasn't happened. Now, once again, when I was just there, the property says for lease. It's a historic structure. The economic use of this building is not changing. That landscape plan has worked for the past 60 years that it has been in construction. It has not damaged the economic viability once. Once again, I urge you to look at the wording. May approve tree removal following a public hearing if it finds that either or both of the following are true. The proposed tree removal is necessary for the economic sustainability of the property. Have we seen any such validation that this tree removal is necessary for the economic sustainability of the property? Keep in mind, it is not your burden of proof. It is the burden of proof of the applicant, whatever it is, the applicant to prove this. They have done no such thing, right? When we're also looking at this, wildlife habitat and movement, once again, we just said, I don't think that it will damage wildlife. One second. We're cutting down 27 trees now at this point. That's more than we have in some of our parks. And once again, when we're looking at the mitigation measures that would be included in the landscaping plan, when we've said that this looks fine, it is 100%, there's not a single native species being added in that landscaping plan, not one. We have hydrangeas, tulips, Chinese junipers, and sweet gums. Not any of those provide, all of those provide, if any, minimal support to native species, no specialization. If we're looking at cutting down a red oak, that's about over 100 insect species gone right there. That's 100 insect species that supports. Right, white pines, let's look at the red squirrel, okay? When we're looking at this and we're saying we don't know, then maybe you don't do it. And also, if we don't know, here's the thing, if you are gonna vote yes, have they demonstrated that this is economically necessary? They haven't. They just said, I think, I can't see the pure, sheer white building right on the side of the highway. It might be slightly difficult. And now I have a feeling I'm approaching the 5-minute mark, so I am gonna go to the bathroom. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Any additional members of the public wish to come forward on this proposal? Seeing none, we'll open it up to the queue online.
Get to it. I was able to see it. Oh, here we go. There's nobody waiting in the queue.
Thank you. So normally we would just say we would see this at another hearing, but I'll open it up to the commission to see if there's any additional comments or potential motions. Commissioner Chapin?
I'll make a motion. Let's put it to vote and see where we go. Okay, so I'll try this. I'm going to use the language presented in the board packet. I move. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I think the motion you're making now is to take this up now and not
To open discussion.
approve the application. So I think you're making a motion
no, I
for
was
us to
going
consider it now.
to move to approve. But I'm going to defer to you.
Yeah, Landon, I think we have
Okay.
to make a motion to consider it now, don't we? Because it's circumventing our normal 2-hearing process.
Oh, you can, I
Or can
mean.
we just take, you
this
can
is-
make a motion.
You can move to approve at this point. You can choose to make a motion
So it's just
to-
a standard motion, as if, okay.
Yeah,
Got it.
I
just wanted to
was
clarify that, so
deferring to
we're
what I
doing it
thought I read in the
correctly.
packet. So
Yeah.
tonight, the other two public hearings, not so much, but tonight we were able to, I'll just make a motion and let's take a vote and see where we go
Yeah,
with
we could
this.
discuss the motion too.
Yeah, beautiful. So I would move to approve a request from Larry Viles on behalf of George F. Eyde Family LLC to remove mature trees from the property located at 120 West Saginaw Street, as the Planning Commission has determined that the following are true. The proposed tree removal will not substantially affect or reduce privacy between this property and those adjacent to it, nor will it substantially affect or reduce screening or buffering from adjacent uses of activities, wildlife habitat and movement, soil and slope stability or regulated wetlands. And new trees or shrubs shall be planted as presented in the landscaping plan with cooperation from City of East Lansing staff. That would be my motion.
Well said. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Chapin, seconded by Commissioner Overby.
Question on the motion?
Please.
I'm stuck on the motion, how it mentions, based on the landscaping plan. Weren't we not supposed to take the landscaping plan into our decision-making on removing the trees?
So the agenda packet and the sample motion gives us the latitude to add conditions onto that, and a condition, as I understand it, that wasn't in the agenda packet. You added a
I
condition.
did, well, I added a couple pieces, but I went to the new trees or shrubs shall be planted, and then I added as presented in the landscaping plan, which we do have on file right now. But I added an additional piece there in cooperation with, what did I say, Rebecca?
City staff.
With city staff. to connect to some of the comments to make this a plan where the city is involved as well as the owner. Okay?
Can we,
Sure,
can we do that?
sure.
Yes.
Well,
Yep.
Wouldn't we, I mean, this is a question for Landon. Wouldn't
Yeah.
we need, in any other process, for a new landscaping plan of this size, wouldn't it need to come before the planning commission? And be approved separately from this?
If it were if it were involved as a site plan for a development of this size, yes, but a simple landscaping plan, if it meets the requirements of the ordinance.
Do we know that it meets the requirements of the ordinance?
Right now, I don't.
Then I'm not
Based on
comfortable
our
putting it in the motion.
conversations, a
Well,
previous
I mean-
iteration may have, but I,
You already put in the motion, we can just vote on it. I mean,
Okay.
That's,
Is it appropriate to ask a question?
this is a discussion part, yeah, Commissioner Williams.
Is your motion to approve the removal of 27 trees or 16 trees?
well,
Or 11 trees?
I think that's a fair question. So
How
really, the application we're approving the application, and it is in the board packet. And the application, removal of 27 trees over 4 inches in diameter. So we're approving this initial application from the packet. In my mind, that's how I presented the motion.
Any further discussion?
On the motion.
Yeah, this is on the motion is to approve it, so we're discussing, yeah, I think I still have some questions, which I'm happy to outline, just a little bit more specifics on the landscape that's being proposed, preference for native, whether we have the latitude to add anything specifically regarding landscaping for a condition on this, and then also, what specifically are we approving? Are we retroactively approving the trees that are already removed, or just the trees that are proposed? So I would be more comfortable taking this up through our normal process. I think given that there's enough questions today, typically we very rarely make exceptions to take things up on the first hearing. Although I was inclined to do so at the onset of this meeting, I think given the amount of questions we have, I'd be more comfortable waiting, but I'm happy to take a vote on it. So, any further discussion?
I'll just make a point.
Commissioner Denault?
No, please, go ahead. I'm still trying to organize my thoughts here.
Well, so I support the motion except for the condition of new trees or shrubs shall be planted in consultation with the city. The first piece of the motion, as I see it, is clean in addressing the trees that need to be removed and doesn't draw into the motion the issue of the landscaping plan, which I don't think we have any ability to approve, and I would urge us not to try and muck around with that.
You're not making a friendly amendment, are you?
Well, yeah, we can
No,
get
I'm
to that
kidding,
too.
I'm kidding, I'm kidding.
I will just say on page 6 of the agenda, there's a line in here that says, "New trees or shrubs shall be planted as follows," and there's a blank space, almost as if it's asking for our input on what this should look like. So this is what the public saw, and this is what's before us, so. But I understand, I think procedurally, we would have to, that would require a motion to amend the original motion, correct? He nods in approval, so I think you'd have to make a motion to amend this motion as such.
And then we would vote on.
And then we would vote on your motion, and then we would take up the original motion.
Yes.
and
Go ahead.
I don't want to gum up the discussion, especially in the
Yeah.
middle of the motion, but would it be helpful if I explained what our normal replacement policy would be for trees that are illegally taken down, or?
Please do.
Okay,
Yeah.
so essentially it's for every 6 inches, I think it's 6, for every 6 inches of tree, and this is diameter that's removed, you would need to plant 2 new 3-inch trees. And then if you were to clear cut 200 square feet of property, every 200 square feet of clear cut property, you'd have to plant 1 new 3-inch tree. So essentially, and I should say, for the removed tree, a 6-inch tree or fraction thereof. So if it's a 4-inch tree removed, you'd have to plant 2 3-inch trees at diameter breast height. if that's helpful to discussion. That would be how we'd normally
Okay,
require replacement of trees.
okay.
Yeah. And Commissioner Overby, you'd be making a motion to amend the previous motion.
Yes, I would like to do that. I move to amend the previous motion by deleting the provision on new trees or shrubs shall be planted as followed with the consultation with the city.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Boyd. Any further discussion on this?
On the whole thing before we
This
vote?
is a
Or just
discussion on the
friendly
motion
amendment?
that we are
Just
entertaining
wanna
right
clarify.
now. Not the entire
Thank
motion,
you.
just a motion to trim this. Another pun.
Yep, that was a good one. So the motion on the table right now is to amend the original motion, and the amending motion is to propose removal of the condition saying that new trees or shrubs should be planted as follows.
Correct.
So that's the vote that's
Correct.
up right now.
So the original motion would,
The
if
original
this was
motion is
approved,
currently
would end
unchanged
at-
until we vote on that.
exactly, but if this amendment is approved,
Then it would be.
wetlands would be the last word in the original motion.
And,
Correct, Rebecca?
and/or the proposed tree removal. That second part as well.
Well,
I
and Commissioner Chapin didn't mention that as a finding.
think it was.
So-
I think it was implied that his motion would apply just to the original
Yeah.
portion and not the
Yeah,
add-on. So I think
okay.
we understood that.
I think we're on the same page,
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
so, seeing no discussion, let's take a vote on this, roll call. Ms. Bartley, okay.
On the amendment,
So
On the
for-
amendment to
Yeah.
the original motion.
So for the amendment that we have introduced from Commissioner Overby and seconded by Boyd, Commissioner Boyd, how do you vote?
Yes.
Commissioner Chapin?
yes?
Commissioner Denault?
No.
Commissioner Hendricks?
No.
Commissioner Lapine?
No.
Commissioner Overby?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
No.
Chair Sullivan?
No,
Nays have it, motion fails.
thank you. And just to
Okay.
clarify, I think, I think we do have some discretion over that, even if it's just delegating that authority to staff. I think ideally, adding a condition that they have to coordinate with staff to get the landscaping plan, at least something as proposed in the agenda packet, I'd be more comfortable with. But I think we've talked about this a lot, so I think I would encourage just a vote on the original motion.
I do have
Commissioner
comment.
Denault?
Are we, so?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I welcome any additional comments, but I think just with the comment from me that we should start wrapping this up.
Thank
What's
you.
the original motion?
The original motion.
Yes, that's.
Yeah.
would you-
Motion to approve?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Coming at this, I think from as a historic preservation professional, part of a structure's historic designation is its context, including landscaping. This structure's recognition on the National Register is not just for the building itself, it is the context of the building, on the land on which it sits, its surroundings, the plantings around it. We don't know that these trees were not part of Yamasaki's intention, and I think making substantial changes to the context in which the building sits, I won't go to the extent of saying that it undermines the building's historic integrity, but it changes the context of that historic structure and the way that it interacts with the plantings around it. And that is the National Register criteria for historic buildings. The second comment that I think I would make is I don't necessarily think it's an and/or situation with the landscaping plan that has been proposed by the applicant. I feel like we're sort of saying they need to remove all the trees in order to institute the landscaping, in their words, more attractive landscaping plan as they see it. But I wonder if there's a sort of middle ground where these trees can remain And they can also make some improvements to the property, right? We've already discussed that shrubs and arborvitae, right, are not included in the tree removal ordinance, right? If they want to remove those and sort of beautify the building in that way, that's their prerogative as a private landowner. And so I hesitate, I think, to say that they can't make the changes that they want to make, and the only way to do that is to eliminate the trees. I think there is a middle ground where the trees and the landscaping can coexist.
All said. Any additional comments before we do a potential vote on this? All right. Roll call, please.
All right, so our motion on the table is moved by Chapin, seconded by Overby, to approve the request as presented in the staff report up to the word wetlands. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Commissioner Boyd,
Yes.
Commissioner Chapin,
Yes?
Commissioner Denault,
No.
Commissioner Hendricks,
No.
Commissioner Lapine,
No.
Commissioner Overby,
Yes.
Commissioner Williams,
No.
and Chair Sullivan.
No.
The nays have it, the motion fails.
Procedurally, could we potentially see this again, or is this the end of it? Like with a more specific landscape plan?
You know, our ordinance doesn't really cover that. So I don't see a reason not to. It does require a public hearing, so we need to renotice if we want to rehear or reconsider. I don't see I think we could rehear this at any time.
Okay. To be clear, I think that just wanted to pass along some guidance. I think with more specifics, I'd be inclined to support it. More specific landscape plan that's outlined before us. Even if we're not approving the landscape plan, just a better understanding of what they're proposing to replace the site with would be beneficial for me personally. So with that, unless there's any additional comments, I think we can move on to the next agenda item.
Let's move on.
Seeing none, item 6.3, a public hearing to consider ordinance 1529, a proposed conditional rezoning of 730 Grove Street. Mr. Bartley?
All right. Right. Thank you. This is a public hearing for a proposed conditional rezoning ordinance. This would be ordinance 1529. Conditional rezoning of 730 Grove Street, which would be rezoning from R2, which is medium density single family residential, to RM32, city center multiple family residential, conditioned upon the property's use as a Class B multiple family dwelling. You've seen this, a similar request recently. The applicant, Michael Zawacki, had recently requested rezoning from R2 to RM32 without any conditions. His intended use of the property is bed and breakfast. Unfortunately, there's no definition of bed and breakfast in our ordinance, and the closest definition that we're able to apply is the Class B multifamily dwelling, which essentially is separate units with shared kitchen facilities. So and that previous unconditional, non-conditioned request had been recommended for approval by the Planning Commission to the City Council. The City Council reviewed it though and did not approve the rezoning. So the applicant is requesting, again, the same rezoning, except with the condition that they voluntarily offered the conditions that would include essentially just using the property as a bed and breakfast. So they offered 5 conditions. Property can only be used as a non-occupied, non-owner-occupied bed and breakfast or inn. Each floor can be rented separately or as a whole house. A freestanding sign shall not be larger than 10 square feet. If property is not, no, I'm sorry, it's 6 conditions. If property is not used for bed and breakfast or inn, then the property shall revert back to present zoning. If property is sold, conditional zoning would follow the property, and property shall be inspected yearly or at such intervals as council see fit. So my notes on each of those offered conditions is that for a property to only be used as a non-owner occupied bed and breakfast or inn, like I mentioned, bed and breakfast is considered a Class B multiple family dwelling, a special use in the RM32 zone district. An inn is considered a hotel or motel, and those are not permitted. So that's why we're looking at sort of Class B multifamily dwelling again, single or separated dwelling units, but shared kitchen facilities, which is what a bed and breakfast would be. Each floor can be rented separately or as a whole house. We don't really have a way to, I guess, look at this as far as a split bed and breakfast. I defer to the applicant on how they sort of envision that being sort of separately rented. But it could, as a Class B multifamily dwelling, if you look at that definition broadly, you could have separate dwelling units, both Class B. Freestanding sign of 10 square feet is totally compliant with the ordinance. The automatic reversion is conditioned or consistent with conditional rezoning requirements. And if that's the case, I did speak with a neighbor today about the process for that, and essentially, if the property were found to be no longer operating as a bed and breakfast, we'd open enforcement, but the ultimate end result of that enforcement would be the staff leading a process which is the same as the rezoning process, but led by staff to take that zoning district back to the R2 if it were no longer meeting that condition. If property is sold, conditional zoning follows the property, that's fine. Land use rights follow property, not the owner, and then property shall be inspected, which is totally in compliance with our rental licensing ordinance. So essentially, if the Planning Commission, this is a public hearing tonight, you're not requested to vote on this, but you would consider those conditions and whether or not they'd be acceptable in your recommendation to City Council, regardless of whether you recommend approval or denial. Any questions about this request before we open the public hearing? And we did receive one letter of opposition that's in your packet.
Yep. Couple initial questions just to set up the context. So currently this is a rental now, right? This is a rental property?
That's correct. It's
okay.
a 2-unit.
And it's not, I know we discussed it last time, it's not currently designated as a historic site, but they're potentially, with this, operating as a bed and breakfast, going to entertain transition.
You know, that's my understanding, is that they were seeking a historical marker from the state. It's not currently a local landmark or in a historic district, a local historic district.
Okay, and then a couple more questions, but I'll defer to the commission first. Seeing none, I know there was some talk last time about potentially updating the definition of what's considered a bed and breakfast. Is there any updates on that?
No, not
Okay.
proposed currently.
And then,
If you feel like there should be, you can certainly request that I start looking into that.
well, I'll say this, not tonight.
Okay.
And then something you said led to a question from me. So you said if it's no longer operating as a bed and breakfast, then it would revert back to its original zoning. Bed and breakfast, well, it's tough because we don't have a definition of what that is. But my understanding of a bed and breakfast is a lot of times people will live there and they will rent out rooms, almost like a small hotel. So if they're no longer renting the rooms, but they're still living, what is no longer operating
Well,
as a bed
and
and
we'd
breakfast?
essentially have to find that it's no longer meeting the requirements of, or a definition of Class B multifamily dwelling for what it's
Okay.
worth, just because that's the closest definition of bed and breakfast. So if, I'm not aware of whether or not the applicant intends to have, it's non-owner occupied. I'm not sure if there'd be a live-in caretaker. I defer to them on that detail. But regardless, if we were to find out that it's no longer acting as a Class B multifamily dwelling, that would then be a violation of the condition. And then we'd start the process to revert. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Any additional questions?
Just,
Commissioner Boyd and then Commissioner Levine.
sorry, go ahead.
So under the bed and breakfast title, it can't be as fraternity or sorority, correct? or it can be.
You know, the applicant's suggestion is that it's a bed and breakfast.
It's,
But they're both Class
it's
B.
already.
And so, and
rental.
fraternities and sororities are Class B as well.
Yeah.
Yes, I thought I read in here that it could be a fraternity or a sorority. So if, I mean, under that, I mean, bed and breakfast could be a broad
Yeah.
statement.
This was, I think this preceded you, but the city had a registration process, I believe, for fraternities and sororities where they had to come before us and get registered as a fraternity. So I think that's a separate process that we would have to entertain if they wanted to turn into a fraternity. We had, in 1 year, I don't know, a dozen applications for fraternities coming before us to get approval to become a fraternity.
But I'm pretty sure I read in here that it said that under that bed and breakfast title, it could be a sorority or a fraternity.
Yeah, they're all Class Bs.
Mm-hmm.
So do they have to come back and like if they
Yeah,
decided
that's
to do
the
that?
question I have.
Would they have to come back and say, hey, it's not gonna be a quote-unquote bed and breakfast, it's gonna be a
Well,
fraternity?
so I mean, if the rezoning is approved conditionally as a Class B multifamily, Class B multifamily still requires special use approval in the RM32 district. So by approving the rezoning, you would not be approving the use necessarily, you would be changing the zoning. So the applicant could then return with a special use request for the bed and breakfast, and at that time, they would specify what kind of Class B multifamily dwelling they're requesting, and that could be conditioned much more narrowly. The rezoning cannot be conditioned except for the conditions offered by the applicant.
Okay.
Did that answer your question? I want to make
A
sure.
little bit, I just thought I read in here that under that classification, it could still be a fraternity or sorority. So I didn't know if they'd have to come back and say, hey, we need to get a special use permit to be a fraternity.
Yeah, so I mean, the definition of Class B multifamily dwelling includes fraternities, sororities, includes hotels, includes lodging houses, includes boarding houses, rooming houses, et cetera, which is odd to me because Class B is allowed and hotels and motels are specifically called out as not allowed. So we would end up essentially just, you would save that level of review and I guess narrowly defining what is being approved for the special use review and approval process.
Yeah, and then, I guess as a general question following up on that, I know that there was the process that we had to register fraternities that went through the planning commission process. I can't remember what it was that we specifically approved. I don't think it was a special use permit, but I think it potentially could have been. But anyways, just for the next meeting, because we're not taking action on this
Yeah,
tonight.
we'll find that out.
Unless there's a motion to, I guess.
Well, and if you were inclined to do a vote tonight, you can, but you'd need to justify it, why you'd
Yeah.
be skipping the extra stuff.
Exactly. But yeah, I just think more context on that would be helpful. Sorry, Commissioner Lepine?
You're good. You might have already said this, Landon, but my brain is fading quickly. Did we get any context on why council voted down the previous version from us that went to before them? Did they give any indication for that?
There was limited discussion. My understanding was that there was some uncomfortable, I guess, lack of comfort with lack of specificity. If there was non-conditioned rezoning, that any use contemplated within the RM32 could be brought forward.
And I remember that being our
Permitted use,
concern
special
too.
use.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you, that helps
And
me.
that was a large concern from neighbors as well.
I appreciate that.
I think that's all the questions I have. If there's any additional questions, seeing none, I think we're ready for the applicant, if they're here.
I'm Mike Zawacki. I'm not going to add too much because I've already been through it. And but I think that was the opposition to, from the community and everyone, council, that there was an overreach, before, and it wasn't specific. There weren't conditions, which there are now. I agree with all that. All I want to do is a bed and breakfast at the house, and I want to make sure that that's all I can do. I'm fine with that. And I think that's what the community, the neighbors, and everyone would prefer. So, yep. Any questions you have, let me know.
Commissioner Williams?
I appreciate your statement that what you want to do is a bed and breakfast, but there's really no generally accepted definition of exactly what that means. So, and you
Sure.
also said bed and breakfast or inn. So to me, those are two very different things. So
Okay.
can you explain a little bit about what you were trying to do?
Yeah, I guess from my standpoint, like the difference between a bed and breakfast and an inn would be the breakfast.
So you are planning on having breakfast?
I'm either way.
So then it's just a bed or an inn?
Yeah.
Really, seriously.
Well, the inn would be without the breakfast, and the bed and breakfast would be with the breakfast. And I said either way, I'm fine with.
That's the,
So it's really like a short-term rental or an inn? I'm just trying to get at, what is it that you're actually trying to do?
Make it a bed
I
and
think
breakfast.
of a bed and breakfast as a very specific thing in my mind. I don't think it is reflected in our ordinances
No.
in any specific way. But
A bed and
I have a
breakfast, yeah.
concept of what a bed and breakfast is. I don't know if we share that concept, because I wouldn't think of it as being exchangeable with an inn or a short-term rental or something like that. So did you just share a little bit more about what you're thinking? What's your business model? What's your concept?
A bed and breakfast. I was just offering the inn as an alternative in case, I wasn't going to serve the food.
So what do you mean by a bed and breakfast? Are you going to have breakfast?
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
And
Commissioner Denault, unless are you done?
I'm done,
Okay,
yep.
Commissioner Denault.
yeah, and
I hope I
think-
answered that.
I don't know.
Maybe I didn't. I
I'm
don't know.
not sure.
And I think, when we do eventually vote on this, I think I would probably recommend striking in, because I think in the staff report, it actually says like an inn is not an allowable use under a Class B, right? And so like,
Okay.
I think that, because I agree with you, right? The bed and breakfast or inn, those are two different things, and I would be inclined to strike in.
I mean, I would suggest that there are some inconsistencies in the code. Like I mentioned, the
Yeah.
hotel is
Yeah.
included in the definition of Class B multifamily dwelling, but it's specifically called out as not permitted in the RM32,
Yeah.
while a Class B is a special use. The state defines bed and breakfast, a single-family residential structure, and shall not be treated as a hotel or other facilities serving transient tenants, but must have 10 or fewer sleeping rooms, including sleeping rooms occupied by the innkeeper, serve meals at no extra cost to transient tenants, and has a smoke detector. But this section does not affect local zoning, fire safety, or housing regulations. So in that, if it wants to qualify as a bed and breakfast for state purposes, he needs to meet this, but it wouldn't affect our review of it, yes. So until we have a more specific definition of bed and breakfast, it's considered a Class B multifamily with the state definition informing it.
I guess my question, it's sort of related to some questions that Chair Sullivan brought up for Mr. Bartley. It mostly focused on us not having, I think, a good definition or designation for a bed and breakfast, right? We're sort of shoehorning what you're trying to do into the code that currently exists. And I think, I serve on this commission, or the committee that will be formed for the master plan. And to me, right, this is now the second meeting in a row that we've seen some issues and questions from residents about short-term rentals, about B&Bs. And so I guess my question to you is, would you be willing and interested to give that committee, the master plan committee, time and space to create a better definition that would allow what you're trying to do, right? It might delay you being able to do it, but we might be able to create a more appropriate, or I don't want to say legal because this is legal, but a better defined way for you to operate your business.
Yeah, I think that would be the best way. However,
Yeah.
it's going to take a long time.
Yeah. I was going to say, what is the
I'd echo
timeline for
that
the master
is-
plan?
Well, the comp plan update will likely be finished around the end of the year, but we then need to,
Yeah.
if we want to make changes, and the zoning ordinance is
Yeah.
meant to be the tool that implements the master plan.
Yeah.
So if we identify that, this definition or this sort of discussion about short-term rentals
Yeah.
and B&Bs, et cetera, as an activity we need to
Yeah.
get into
Yeah.
on the, that would come after the comp plan update. It could be the end of 2025.
You'd have to change the ordinances. and-
So we have
Right.
to change the ordinance in order to bring that definition in, unless we were to bring it, move forward with the definition immediately before the comp plan update.
Yeah, I
Really
think
gets going.
it's a valid point, is what I was trying to get at, and I think it is one of the things that needs to be reviewed when that process plays out, because, you know, it's the second time they've come back, I think as clear as they can be potentially about what they're trying to do, and this is what the ordinance allows, and this is kind of two different pathways, this one being the more restrictive of it, but I guess I'm going to ask the same question I asked Mr. Bartley. I know at the last time you were before us, you referenced the historic designation and some of the processes you were going through to get this building declared historic. Is there any updates to that?
The only update is an email I've received from, I believe, the State Historical Commission saying that we've received your application and that we're reviewing it. I don't know. I've never done this, so I don't know how long that takes. I know it usually does take about a year in all. You probably about a year, but I haven't heard any. I replied to that. Thank you. Look forward to hearing back from you. I believe they're in the review process, and I'll be hearing soon. It would be my expectation.
Thank you. I was just curious.
Absolutely.
Can I
Sure.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
So, you know, when you were last here,
Sure.
we talked about the difference between local historic designation and national historic
Yes.
designation. So it sounds like going through the state, that's national historic designation. It is.
Okay.
Through the SHPO, through the State Historic Preservation Office. Are you talking to the Historic District Commission here in East Lansing to seek a local designation as well?
I could be wrong. I was under the assumption that it had a local designation through the city. It was already. Am I
It does not.
It does not.
Yeah.
Oh, then I'm wrong. Then I will.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, the Historic District Commission discussed this, I would say, sort of conceptually, and just would the designation of this as a historic marker from the state, or would the rezoning to an RM32 affect, jeopardize whatever it might be of the historic district, which is located close by. It's just to the south, and actually just to the east of this property, but it doesn't include this property.
Yeah, and I think that's why we talked about that distinction at the last meeting, because I do think I don't want to say like using the Airbnb, or not Airbnb, using the bed and breakfast, right, as a sort of historic tourism benefit, right,
Right.
rather than just having it be like a student rental, right, that.
Which is what it is now. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It sort of makes sense to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've received any additional comments before we open the public hearing?
I guess
Commissioner Lepine?
how many people do you anticipate like coming to the bed and breakfast, like, and how often would they turn over?
Right. As far as vacancy rate or anticipation, I mean, of course, I would hope 100%. But if you think about it, that would be the number of people coming through. The way I, would by floor would be the traffic would be much less than what it currently is as myself living there and then with five students that typically all have a friend at least that comes and stays every night. So there's 6 of us that live there with a couple, 2, 3 more every night at least. I mean, you're upwards of 10 people every night, and that's at a minimum every night, and that's almost guaranteed. Right now, that's current and how it has been. Nowhere near that with how the bed and breakfast would be. It just wouldn't be. And nights where it's not where no one's staying, it would be nobody. So, does that answer?
Okay, thank you.
I think so. Thank you. Seeing no further questions, at this point, we'll open the public hearing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
First card I have up is Lisa Hominiak. Did I? Hominick.
You have my permission to stand up for a minute if you'd like. It's like, I can't imagine sitting here, sitting that long. Lisa Hominick, I live at 222 Ridge Road, and my property backs up immediately to the property in question here. With all that is said, I'm still opposed to the rezoning, in that it's still going to be RM32, no matter which way you look at it. And so many other things can happen in an RM32 rezoning. Even with the conditional rezoning, I sent a couple questions. I don't know if you saw your email earlier. If the property is rezoned to RM32 and the master plan revision considers it a non-conforming use, what happens then? If the B&B ceases to operate, timeline, is there a timeline on the automatic reversion to old rezoning? And which rezoning would that be if the master plan changes? These are just things that I don't know if that's nitpicky or if that's realistic.
And Commission, I'm happy to answer those questions.
Mr.
Okay.
Bartley, if you do have the answers.
You have the answer, okay. But it's, for someone, a layperson in the community, granted, I did talk to a city planner friend of mine, but he did help me formulate some of the questions. But the fact that he knew what I was getting at and could pinpoint it and help me here was very helpful. And, if it gets to the point, we're neighbors, I understand this, and it's not personal. For this type of change to happen in a residential community, you're putting in yet another business. We already have rental businesses. Now we're putting in a B&B business with a sign. I'm sorry, it's just, I continue on my opposition, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Deborah Stewart.
Good evening, and thank you for your time for us to communicate and exchange thoughts and ideas. I realize that all of us care about our community deeply. With that, I was sharing a Stewart family letter by myself, Deborah Ann Stewart, a 64-year resident of Grove Street, grew up in a beautiful area of trees and wildlife. James Nelson Stewart and Joffrey John Michael Stewart are also represented in the letter. Our Stewart family letter is in support for maintaining College Grove as a historic district by maintaining the current R2 single-family zoning for 730 Grove Street, and therefore deny at this time the request for rezoning from R2 to RM32. And again, our concern is that level of zoning, and for the commission to wait for more appropriate zoning codes to go through the appropriate procedures, as good things do take time. We thank the Planning Commission members for your time and talent this evening serving on the commission. Our father, Roger Stewart, many of you know, served over 15 years on East Lansing Planning and Zoning Commissions and boards, giving his time and, like yourself, love for the community. As a property tax appeals consultant, he was very aware of how your decisions in zoning affect the worth of properties and the composition of a neighborhood. We feel at this time he would have advised the Planning Commission to wait to adopt a more appropriate zoning code for the area. Again, I write this as a 64-year resident and now property owner of Grove Street, concerned about the activities in the neighborhood. Most concerning is the fact, which Mike alluded to, that the rezoning to RM32 allows for many more uses than what is addressed in the application. We do feel continuously that it's an overreach from the 2018 master plan suggestions. It is time for the 5-year revision of the master plan, and it's our hope that you would wait and go through the process of looking at the area, considering rezoning, of which one of our neighbors, professor and an expert in LEED building construction, neighbor Professor Tim Merzowski, had referred to the city. I also wanted to speak to the commission tonight because we all have different ideas of what a bed and breakfast is, which has come up in our conversation. I think many of us think of it a place where the homeowner is present, provides a breakfast, and information about the area and the beauty of the significance of things to do and see in the area. My concern and my family members' concern is that it may become more of an Airbnb, whereby it would not enrich the neighborhood, as the property owner is not required to live on site to supervise guests or property management. Our concern, it would likely become a party house. I also felt a responsibility to point out, I believe from reading the packet of information, Mike, as property owner, was advised that a traffic study was not necessary. And I did want to share with the commission that 2 months after the date of that letter, I had observed a high school student to be struck by a vehicle on the corner of Grove and Bircham. In part, it's the Planning Commission's responsibility as well as the driver, which was distracted, a young college student who drove off and did not take time to find out about the nature of the student which she struck. Historically, that corner had a historic home, a family of 2 drivers and children. It now has over 50 people coming and going. I did want to alert the Planning Commission that it's a dangerous area on both ends of Grove Street now for the high school students, which are pedestrians 4 times a day. That was my main concern to come before you this evening. As previously stated, it's our hope that the Planning Commission's wait for a more appropriate zoning category for the Grove Street area before making changes in rezoning to 730 Grove Street. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. Is there anybody else that would wish to come forward and address us? All right, seeing none. Is there anyone online in the queue?
There's nobody waiting in the queue.
Thank you. At this point, we would close the public hearing, and then we will see this item at the next Planning Commission meeting.
And just real quick, before we move on, I wanted to mention Ms. Hamanek had questions. And I just wanted to quickly call those out. She had asked about the timeline and threshold for reversion. I mentioned that I guess under 2 circumstances I would begin the reversion process. Number 1, if there's been no action taken to establish the approved use within 18 months of approval, if this were to be approved. But the zoning ordinance does not currently specify a vacancy or abandonment threshold, how long that would take. before I begin that process. So as I mentioned, we go through our typical enforcement process. We would find out that the use as conditioned in the conditional rezoning had been abandoned, and then that's typically 2 to 4 weeks, and then we begin the process to revert the ordinance. Typically would be about the time we'd start the process if we were to find out that the use had ceased. As far as there had been a question about the master plan, if the master plan update were to find that this would be a non-conforming use, I just wanted to sort of clarify, as a master plan designation of a property would have no impact on the property or zoning other than guiding the planning commission in its rezoning decisions. So we expect when we update this comp plan next year or this year that we'll have zoning changes that will follow, and the master plan will be the guidance document for that, but the adoption of the master plan itself doesn't have an impact on any properties immediately. The zoning ordinance does. And then finally, I think there was a question of, do we know if an innkeeper will live on site? And I don't know that. I know that the applicant indicated the property would be non-owner occupied, but I don't know if there's a live-in caretaker. So I just wanted to clarify those questions, and those are my answers.
Got it. So to clarify, the master plan is not changing the zoning. It's just a guiding document for future
Correct.
decisions.
So even if the comp plan were to come back and say we should make this area industrial, which it won't, but let's say it did as sort of a off left field example. Even if it said industrial, the properties would not change zoning until the zoning ordinance was changed according to the master plan. So the master plan being adopted is saying this is where we're going to go, but that's as far as it goes.
And if it was, if a rezone potentially is RM32, that would have no impact. You would just change the zoning for a later application, right? They wouldn't be non-conforming. They would be grandfathered in essentially.
Yeah. So if the zoning is changed, and conditionally, then the applicant has 18 months to take action. If they take no action, then the zoning goes back through the process. And only the Class B would be contemplated under RM32 rezoning.
Got it.
I feel like I might have just missed your question, but my computer died in front of me, so I got distracted.
Okay.
Did I cover it?
I think so. Thank you for that quick explanation. So I think that takes us on to item number 7, unfinished business. This looks like a new agenda category. I don't know what this is.
This was a recommendation from our parliamentary procedure training.
Okay.
Stop calling unfinished
so.
business old business, so we've changed it.
Okay, so you're changing the terminology for old business. Got it. Okay. There's no new business, so that takes us on to item number 9, commissioner concerns. Is there any commissioner concerns? Seeing none, I believe a motion to adjourn is in order.
Second.
Well, you guys have too many at once.
Second, third, fourth.
Don't be in such a big hurry to get out of here. Okay. Moved by Commissioner Boyd, seconded by Commissioner Lapine. Seeing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. We are adjourned at 9:41 p.m.